Okay, so my name's Steve Halliday. I'm the past president of Socitm, we were the Society of IT Managers, the Society of IT and Digital Leaders we are now, which is so much more exciting, isn't it? The presentation I've been asked to give with you, I want to keep it fairly much as a discussion, as a seminar. So if you've got questions that you want to ask as we go, then please do that. I'll leave a fair bit of time at the end for questions as well. One of the things I want to sort of talk with you about is how would it be if it was like this, and I'd like to get some feedback on that for kind of shaping a few ideas around that. I'm conscious, though, that Francis Maud is speaking in the main auditorium at 2:55. So if people want to leave out for that, if you want to finish early, that's I would be very, very mortified and hurt and wounded by that. But it might be. So do people want to leave for that? No one wants to go and see Francis Maud, do they? A few people do, yeah. So it's love him or hate him, he's the brand. So it might be worth, if you want to go and have a conversation with that. Okay, so I'm looking to talk with you a little bit about PSN, Public Services Network, and the balancing of risks. Can I just get a view from the audience? Is everybody here familiar with and understands what the PSN is? I'm assuming most of you customers of the Public Services Network and have engaged it in some way. So I'm seeing mostly nodding heads and one shaking head. Anybody else shaking their heads? No? Okay, so can you explain to her later? 'Cause otherwise we might... I'm making the assumption today that people know what the Public Services Network is. But in a nutshell, the Public Services Network is a network of networks to enable shared common services and transport of information between public service organisations, so across local, central departments, third sector as well. The ability to share information between and to share services, therefore, and to share applications and infrastructure across the whole of the public services. So a kind of secure internet for the public services organisations is the big architectural principle of the Public Services Network. It's born a good many years ago and has gone through a number of iterations to arrive where we are in 2014 with a fair amount of maturity in Public Services Network and a fair amount of sometimes quite heated debate around security and compliance in the Public Services Network area. Has everybody had some exposure to some of that security dialogue, if you like? And you have some views and opinions about that. I see some nodding heads as well. So I think it's useful to everyone if we're able to dive into that a little bit and have something of a conversation around what those issues have been for yourselves. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to let's have a look at this view of what a public services network might be thought of from different perspectives. So here's a classic kind of... I didn't do the cartoon, so the language isn't mine, but there's the crypto nerd, somebody whose job it is to make sure that cyber is secure, that information security is absolutely nailed down, and that the bad guys can't get in and do bad things with our data and our information and sell it and do mischievous things like fraud and mischievous things like denial of service type attacks. PSN must be really secure to lock out those sorts of activities. So here they are. They've built some very clever stuff with some high-tech equipment, and the bad guys are saying, "Oh blast! Our evil plan is foiled because the security's that tight. We better go and attack somewhere else, really, because the security's so good here." That's what happens in the so-called crypto nerd's imagination. And then, actually, what really happens is something kind of slightly more human than that. And the balance, if you like, quite often in information security is around those sorts of things where you're kind of thinking, on the one hand, I'm going to focus down my channel of expertise and I'm going to lock out the ability for people to do things which are mischievous or disadvantageous or downright criminal. And actually everybody will always find a way around that. And the ways around that are often quite human. So the art of ensuring you've got good security is to get that balance and to get that good agility as well, to get the balance of making sure we can still do what our business needs to do and be secure at the same time. And sometimes the more you lock it down, the worse it gets, actually. And in this instance, it feels like the bad guys have found a solution which is sometimes known as social engineering, but that's a very extreme form, if you like, of social engineering with a wrench. Okay. So one of the things I've been involved in with a few other people in the room as well is in local government in particular. I work for Solihull Council. I'm the CIO at Solihull Council. And what we've been involved in is a organisation that's kind of come together as a way of tackling some of the conflicting balances within the public services network. So we've become known as the seniors, if you like, the PSN seniors. So those organisations from the Cabinet Office who've been tasked with administering the PSN, CESG from GCHQ have been tasked with ensuring that the security of the network is good. DCLG have got an interest in it as well, obviously Department of Work and Pensions and HMRC. The local CIO council is mostly local public services CIOs who have a vested interest in making sure that they can deliver their services in a secure way. And as you can imagine, across all of those organisations, Solis, this organisation of chief executives in local government, have a slightly different perspective on what's necessary and what's needed than perhaps the CSG might have. That's not right and wrong, that's just a difference in perspective. And the art of trying to get the balance right is perhaps to be able to understand, empathise with each other's position a bit, and probably shift a bit of ground. And I think that has been what's happening with the PSN. I'm very pleased to see that over the last year some ground has shifted. People keep learning. None of those organisations would claim to be perfect in any way, but it is a tension that exists between getting that balance right, making sure that we can deliver the outcomes of public service delivery in a way that is necessarily secure, but doesn't then lock out the ability to do important things that you need to do to keep your business going. The LJ and Socitm involved in that as well, and the LJ in particular coordinated a workshop which brought all of those people together at the end of quite a long period of kind of regular meetings and updates and talking about different ways of doing things. And at that workshop, one of the things that emerged was actually a requirement to deliver a solution for the PSN, which is about a balanced scorecard of risk. And at the workshop, we'd split into loads of different tables and work groups, and there were flip charts and post-its, and people were talking about different ways to deliver secure solutions and different ways of getting the business agility with security at the same time. And most of the separate groups surfaced a requirement to do a balanced risk scorecard, and probably all of them meant something different, but slightly the same, but maybe a little bit different. So in the table that I was at, we had a fairly clear idea of what we thought we meant by it. I imagine at the other tables they also had a fairly clear idea, and they may or may not have been the same. But what I wanted to do was, before we so we're going down this route with the seniors group and others to say, here's a balanced scorecard of risk, I wanted to kind of have an opportunity to sanity check it a bit with some people like you who, with one exception, are all familiar with what the PSN is and some of the issues that have been manifesting themselves over the last 18 months, probably. And I'm sure there's probably a mix of people in the room from some or all of those organisations, and that's really good and healthy, because it is about getting those perspectives and balances right across all of those organisations. Started looking, therefore, at balance. So what does it mean when we talk about balance and when we talk about risk? So kind of everything that you do all the time is about balancing risks, isn't it? There is no opportunity really to get to a point where you have no risks. There's always risks, and you basically exchange one risk for another. This morning you could have stayed in bed, but you took some risks and you got out of bed, and you maybe made some tea, and there's a risk in doing that, but it's probably a better risk than not making some tea. All the time throughout life, we all know this. You're exchanging one risk for other. Should you cross the road or should you not cross the road? And there's balances of risks in doing either of those. If you never cross the road, you never actually do anything, but you might be more safe, or you might not. It might make things worse. If you If you got hit by a car, or if you're an elderly person had a fall, is going to hospital a bigger risk or a smaller risk? You actually transfer the risks of catching other diseases when you go to hospital, but you probably think it's a good idea to go there. So all the time, balancing risks is a thing that you have to do as a human creature, as any other creature, really. And life's kind of like that, isn't it? It's about you spend the time exchanging risks from one type of risk to another in pretty much everything that you do. And I'm imagining that most of you live in organisations that use standard ways of managing risk, that you probably use a fairly standard risk matrix like that. Is that what most of you do? You all have a view, one or two shaking heads, so you understand the impact of the risk and you understand the probability of the risk. And if it's really going to be really bad if this thing happened, and it's really going to be really likely that this thing will happen, then you'll have a 9, and so on and so forth, and you work out the risks, and you score the risks against that. So that's a standard risk matrix, standard risk management approach. So when you apply that to each of the silos of risk within something like the PSN, it creates a potential to have a balanced scorecard of risks. So kind of up that side on that far side over there, you can see the different kinds of risks. And all the time, as you're delivering an information security architecture, an information governance world, services, you're saying, okay, if I provide access to internet email, that creates some risks, and I'll put some mitigations in place. And the mitigations are sort of, I've got now virus protection, and I've got all kinds of filters and spam filters and things. So although there's a risk, I'm mitigating against it with some security. And that's very common, and we've been doing that for the last couple of decades or so. Same with the web browser. That's a very, very common thing. That's what you do. That's all happening. No particular surprises or shocks there. You might then say, well, actually, I'd like to have a laptop. Exciting news from late 1990. I'm going to have a laptop. And that may create some different risks. And what shall we do about that? Oh, we'll encrypt those laptops. So you've done something and you've balanced some risks and you've made a decision. It might be more secure not to have a laptop, but you want to have mobile working. So if you go and you do that, remote access, much the same. So this will all be familiar territory to pretty much all of you, as will probably be some of the other things about to come up. But what happened most recently is a sudden groundswell in commoditization and bring your own devices and so-called unmanaged endpoints. So onto that balanced scorecard of risk came a new thing, and that alerted some people and made some people very concerned, and quite rightly too. You know, if your responsibility is to make sure that your organisation is safe and secure, then you absolutely must have managed devices. You must be able to do that. So suddenly, here comes privately owned, unmanaged devices, and people say we can't have that. We can't certainly have that. I should say in Solihull we're very proud of having won some security awards for our Bring Your Own device scheme, and Bring Your Own is absolutely a critical aspect of my security architecture. And so one of the things I've been keen to do is to protect that investment and to protect the security of the PSN, which, you know, you must balance both of those. So what happens? The first reaction had been a kind of extreme mitigating action. What we should do is lock out privately owned devices, of course. We shouldn't allow them onto our network. That would be madness. That sounds sensible because you've gone from a really high risk to a really low risk. But when you look across the balanced scorecard, it begins to create some other risks, doesn't it? So here are some other problems that suddenly emerge as a consequence of having locked out privately owned devices. And I like to use the term privately owned devices rather than unmanaged, because as soon as you put some software onto a privately owned device, if it's called MDM, it's kind of managed then, isn't it? That's what the M stands for. So privately owned devices. So if you take that mitigation action and you lock out those privately owned devices, you get some other problems that emerge in the business. And that's why when the seniors group, that's why the chief executives were all getting up in arms about this, because they were finding that their mobile working strategy, their interagency working strategies were beginning to have some substantial problems as a consequence of having gone for the locking out privately owned devices. A remote access as well, which was working fine, suddenly because you decided to pull this one down on private devices, you retrospectively had to apply some stuff across your other remote access, and that took out some of the ability for you to use other remote devices, and that had a knock-on effect on the interagencies, and where you did have agencies, particularly in local government, like charities coming in and accessing social care systems, suddenly they weren't allowed to anymore, and that means that they weren't allowed to understand the data, and that means that they were probably putting children at risk, or adults at risk, because they weren't... So by playing down one risk, we've played up another risk. So it's a bit like a kind of like a mixer desk. So as you pull down one risk, other risks pop up. And the art is to balance the risks to get them to a point where you're accepting and you're tolerating some sensibly and not tolerating others. So obviously the kind of reaction to that has been allow some MDM-controlled devices. That might be mobile device management, or that might be mobile data management. There's two ways of achieving that. At Solihull, we've used pretty much a mobile data management solution through Good for Enterprise, and we've also used other Juniper-type access to make that this a possibility. And that's so once you've actually increased the risk of the private-owned devices. So it's gone down from kind of that point up to that point. So that's kind of a bad thing if you want to manage risk. But all the other risks have dropped down as well. So you're heaving a bit of a sigh of relief. So that seems like a practical and a pragmatic thing to do in responding to the threat challenge. But if your responsibility is in cyber technology, cyber security land, it's kind of inevitable that you would see, particularly down the private devices channel predominantly, which is why it's important to sort of step out and for each organisation and each perspective, and it's not unique to each organisation. There are cyber security people who have a good job, that's a necessary job in each organisation, but it's about making sure that dialogue takes place in order that we have a good balance of risk within that. The same thing's probably about to happen with the criminal records checking. So BPSS is about to emerge, and as you know, there's a risk of staff fraud as people become more engaged in those activities, and there's an impact that might come from that. People can hit you on the head with a spanner, and even if you're perfectly without any kind of blemish in your criminal record world, you could nonetheless be vulnerable to those sorts of ill-gotten gains, and bad things could happen. So there's a dialogue to be had here, and I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, to be honest, but there certainly is a dialogue to be had around how we respond to the staff fraud question and the other activities that might be met through allowing people familiar with BPSS, the replacement, in effect, for criminal records bureau type approach. So there's some work to be done, and there's a balance here with there's another dimension on here which is about austerity and about efficiency. How far should we go with that, and how do you get the best bang for the buck in going through that activity, in managing your staff and making sure that the people that you employ are people that you can trust to access your data. And as an organisation, you have a responsibility to make sure that the people that you employ are trustable to access your data. But how you get to that point is a kind of rather more moot conversation, and it might be the best thing to do is to give everybody in your organisation a BPSS check and pay the money to do that. Or it might not be, but there's definitely a conversation to be had within that. So kind of to get that balance right, as we go into the ongoing conversations with the governance within PSN and with the particularly the seniors group I talked about, we're kind of thinking, well, I'm kind of thinking, certainly, and I know certainly some of my colleagues are as well, that having that kind of big picture balanced view would be a good thing. And I'm interested to know what people in the audience think, because there's certainly, I gave you two quick examples there. One that's really easily accessible with the privately owned devices, one around the BPSS world as well. But certainly, there's plenty more. There's more where that came from. And each of them you kind of need to understand not only down the silo of that specific risk, but the impact that those mitigations have on the other risks across the portfolio. And that's, that ain't easy, and that ain't one answer either. Each of those organisations that we talked about earlier will have a different view and different perspective. And probably each individual in those organisations will have a different view and a different perspective as well. So there probably isn't a right in there, but there is certainly a best balanced. And as you know, I'm a big believer that the PSN is something which can deliver massive efficiencies and economies for public services. I think it is the shape of the future, and if we can make it really successful and really work, there are great things which will come from it. And if we make it really tight and people feel it as a negative thing, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It will be a negative thing, and that would be bad. So certainly in that kind of leadership of PSN governance, trying to get to a place where we're saying that there's a requirement in that to make sure that we're balancing those risks well is where we want to get to. So I was hoping to finish right about now, because I know you all want to go and see Francis Maud, because he's so much more famous than I am. But I'd like to take some questions on that. I think there is this kind of, if you're not careful, if you don't get the balance right, you focus on one particular risk channel, and that tiny pebble holds up all the other pebbles, is probably not the best place to be. So that's kind of what we'll kind of need to avoid. And I do believe to achieve it, we need all of those organisations to work together, to talk together, have good relations and good empathy with each other to understand each other's perspectives. That's all I wanted to say. I'm aware there's a question from the front already. Any other questions, please have a good conversation. You're next.
Could
you just say who you are?
Leonard Anderson, Socitm. I'm wondering if it always definitely excludes the private citizen. Is it only available for people who are public sector employees, voluntary sector employees?
You mean the public sector network as large, services network at large?
Yeah, so general transactions by members of the public, are they excluded?
Yeah, I think probably broadly, well, yes and no. So were you to report a pothole on a public services website, you're accessing through the internet, you're accessing those things, it's digital channels, but the data, once it goes through the firewall then. So all of the public service network is beyond the firewall, if you like. And the public services network allows you to interact with citizens in a secure way, to then take that data and transact with it in a behind the firewall way. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Chap over there had a question. Okay, and then one at the back.
Hi. Hello. Steve Jones, Environment Agency.
Hello, Steve.
We're going through the PSN COCO at the moment. It's been submitted. Do you think that perhaps the COCO, Code of Connection, by the way, sorry, shouldn't use acronyms. Do you think they're being a little bit too draconian with some of the security and hoops that you need to jump through? I mean, it seems far more complex in the simple government secure internet, for instance.
Do I think they've been more secure than they need to be?
No, been more draconian. In the measures that they're requiring.
So it would only be draconian if the security was unnecessary. So
I guess that's part of the question.
Isn't it? Yeah. So I think that there's an ongoing dialogue about that. I think if you like, there's a supplier-customer relationship in that, and to a certain extent, as you're going through the COCO, you're a customer. As you're developing the COCO, you're a supplier. So there is a kind of responsibility for the customer to say how it feels, to say what it's like, to be able to articulate that well, and to be able to understand the balance of those. If you like, it feels draconian. Here's what's happening. The flip side would be if there was none of that code of compliance, and bad things happened, and data was lost, and people had to change their bank accounts because they were being hacked into. Everyone would say, well, actually, they weren't draconian enough. They should have been more draconian. So it's about getting that balance right and having a good conversation. And it's about recognising you'll never eliminate the risk, but you will need to minimise the risk. And you need, as an organisation, to have the ability to take the view of what risks you want to take with your data, but as an organisation, as part of the public service community, to know what risks the community is prepared to take, prepared to allow you to take with somebody else's data. So if you're receiving data, you need to be mindful of that. But it certainly isn't. If the draconianness is coming from the cyber channel, it's a responsibility of everybody else to say, hang on a moment, that's perhaps not altogether necessary. What about thinking about it like this? So, long answer to a short question, but I believe it's more nuanced than either black and white and draconian and not draconian.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chap at the back has a question there.
Hi, I'm Peter Strode, Windsor and Maidenhead Council. I've been working on Code of Connection and I'm implementing PSN as we speak.
Good man.
Just an observation about draconian or not.
Yeah.
If you actually go and read through and just in a simple way understand what COCO is saying, it's saying things like make sure everybody in the workforce has security awareness training. So I think it's a matter of where you're pitching your tent, and I think the Code of Connection is there because it was the government's risk, because we were connecting into the government network. Anyway, that's not my question, that's my reaction.
Okay. That's the statement. The question follows.
This is about BPSS, because I'm about to do some work on, and this is personnel security checking, basically.
Yes.
And currently, in Code of Connection and PSN, can you hear?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll speak up.
Yeah.
There is a red line that says that all government employees go through this checking. Therefore, anyone linking into the government IT network must have equivalent checking.
Yep.
That's a statement. That's true. You read it.
I believe that's on the frequently asked questions from the Cabinet Office, yes.
Correct. I'm about to go into that again in more detail. Is it a red line? What does Socitm say? You were very diplomatic and you were saying we're going to persuade them. Again, you've done a good job on Cabinet Office so far, but as of now, I will not, because I'm instructed by Cabinet Office, I will not permit people to access the government network unless they have a current DBS, which is Disclosure Barring Service, or a Disclosure Scotland.
Yeah, understood. So you're kind of saying, as an upstanding civic citizen, those are the rules, and you're not prepared to...
I'm prepared to, but I'm waiting for you to tell me if I can.
You're not prepared to break the rules, but we are prepared to negotiate.
I can break any rule going. It's to do with judgment. How do you exercise judgment in that constrained situation without just throwing the whole thing away?
Yeah. So you're right that they aren't Socitm's rules. I mean, whether I've done a good job with the Cabinet Office, I think collectively the Cabinet Office has responded really well. The Solace and the other organisations have stepped up to the plate as well, and we've had a good conversation, and we've kind of moved the game a bit from where it was to where perhaps it feels a bit better. And I think the same thing needs to happen with BPSS. There's an immediate gut reaction, and then there's a dialogue. The problem is that the time isn't good, because some organisations have compliance requirements coming up for submissions right now. And the rules are the rules, and if you want to get through your compliance, you need to follow the rules. But I do think as a community, we need to be having that conversation ongoing around, is the way of responding to this threat best met in this way? And that is part of a dialogue for which if I stood here and said I have the answer, I would be I would be a fool, because nobody has the answer, because it's part of a balance of dialogues.
Okay, I've decided what to do. You've made up my mind without saying anything, so it's fine.
Okay, I'm glad you have done that, sir.
I think it's a bit like the previous discussions on devices, so I'm fine.
Yeah. Conscious we're just running to the end of time. I probably have time for another question, though. Question from the chap in the middle.
Peter Sullivan, Surrey County Council.
Hi, Peter.
Hiya. Really, it's following on from there. Is this something that Socitm could do to help identify what good solutions you got? You say in Solihull you've got a solution that you've got through COCO for BYOD.
Yeah.
We haven't managed to do that.
Right.
And we haven't we haven't strip out. So is there something we can get other councils together? Someone else must have another solution for remote access or a solution for this.
Yeah.
Can Socitm help to get us all together?
Yeah, so
for
two things Socitm's wanting to do. One is a solutions advisory group that you may have heard of. So that's where it's about sharing best practice, best ideas. If one organisation's done something, how can another organisation benefit from it? The difficulty with that has been it takes a hell of a lot of time to talk to an organisation and understand their technical architecture and understand their kind of historical implementations, and then understand the solutions in the marketplace, and then understand which one's right for you. So that's a big capacity demand. So we're trying to put some capacity together with that. You may have heard there's a crowdsourcing idea about building that capacity. Socitm really wants to make that happen. The other bit that is relevant to your question is that the innovations platform, where we're basically publishing online on a Socitm innovations platform, encouraging people to say, here's what we do, here's how it works. And I think if you go onto the site, you'll find a link there to the innovations platform. And if you've got some solutions which you've done and you publish those, if everyone's sharing a bit and learning a bit, that's going to be a good place to be, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do we need to wrap up at that? Everyone who's interested in Lord's already gone, I think. But yeah. Okay, so kind of just in summary then, to say, does that perspective, does that kind of view of a kind of the balanced scorecard of risk, does that sound like a sensible way of having the conversation? Does that resonate with you? Nodding heads. Nodding heads. We'll try and do that then. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.